Hello, I thought I'd make a video about John chapter 12, just to kind of share. This is just what our Bible study group is going over in our walk through John, just a chapter a week. So what we did today is we went through some slides, a worksheet, and some handouts about John chapter 12. And honestly, I just thought I'd make a little video to share with others, but also to remind myself of the things that we said for the next time we do John chapter 12. So as always in these small groups, we just kind of start with John's take-home message, just to kind of get the big picture. All these things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, that by believing you may have life in his name. This time it's a little bit more like reflections on the Old Testament in John chapter 12. It's a pretty fun chapter. There's a lot of content in chapter 12 of John. That starts with 6 days before Passover, so our calendars are no longer month calendars, but week calendars. There's the story of Anointed with pouring oil on his feet and the triumphal entry on the donkey, and then there's just so many other things that happen in chapter 12. The big picture of where we're at is we're halfway, all right? So we actually, in a way, just started the second half of the book with this chapter. So you can break up John into 7 pieces. We'll talk about that on the next slide, or 4 pieces, and there's different ways you can look at that. But the most popular historically is with what people call a book of signs. So there were the 7 signs, Lazarus being the 7th. And then the second half is the book of glory. So they always talk about Jesus being lifted up or glorified, which is, of course, talking about crucifixion. And really, Chapter 12 is the start of the book of glory. The things here are going to point forwards as opposed to connecting with the things before. So today is the first day of the book of glory. When we talk about breaking it up, we can look at these 2 chapters and we see that they're kind of related. They're both Bethany. They're both Lazarus. They both start, both chapter 11 and 12, start with a comment about how Mary is the one who poured oil on his feet and wiped them with his hair. That's in both chapters. Here's the one where it really happens. They also have that, like, Jesus cried out in a loud voice at the end. So very connected chapters. So if you divide John into 7 pieces, it divides pretty well with an epilogue, a prologue, things about like a model of discipleship here, things about festivals here. This is going to all be the Last Supper. This is his crucifixion and burial, resurrection, and then the epilogue. So it divides pretty well into 7. But if you were divided into 4, it's kind of funny that these chapters get broken up. I just find that interesting that they're a group of 2 if you're breaking to 7, but they're also split if you divide it into fewer pieces. Where does the Bible Project put this chapter? Obviously, it's with chapter 11 and 12. So it's the very middle. So just crossed over the 50% on the other team's court now. Things that we're going to see, so Anointed by Mary and Bethany, triumphal entry, so he's going to start in Bethany, get on a colt, a foal of a donkey in Bethphage, and he's going to ride that in for the triumphal entry. We're going to see John's account of that here. Once he gets into Jerusalem, presumably he stays outside of the perimeter because he's got Greeks with him, so there's like a wall where Greeks can't go past. And he makes a lot of meaningful statements, and they come rapid fire, right? Like, the hour has come. There's a voice from heaven, a quote from what most people put in Gethsemane, the man is the light, or Son of Man is the light, and it's like boom, 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 boom. And then after those, Jesus will hide himself. And then John, the author, is going to speak directly to the camera for a little bit. So it just kind of grabs the microphone and tells us some things from Isaiah. He just explains all this, right? It's like, hey, you might find it unbelievable that people don't believe him after all these signs, but that actually is what was expected. And this whole chapter has a lot of like scripture fulfillment and things, and then there's a section at the end which we just won't even have close to time for. As always, there's a lot of videos and resources that you should watch, and so one of the ones that I watched with the group was just a little bit of Tim Mackey's talk about John chapter 12. I thought it was funny, so I played it. I'll just kind of play the first 20 seconds.
12. Oh, man, chapter 12. Yeah, there's no time.
So that was just kind of his little funny intro. It was like, chapter 12, there's just so much. There's just no time. But he does a really nice job of breaking down some things in chapter 12. The thing that we did watch with our group is we watched a couple Bible Project videos. So this chapter, like I say, it's a lot about fulfillment of covenants and promises and prophecies. And so we tried to get our brains around that a little bit better. You've got to realize that, like, some people know the Old Testament just like really, really well, but we don't as well. And so we looked at some of the promises about Messiah, some of the covenants, and we watched these videos. Just kind of for the sake of this video, I'm not going to play them. I'm just going to kind of point out a couple of things here. So this is the text behind some of these things. And so we see that there's a promise about, this is made to Eve. So this starts super early, right? He's going to put enmity between the serpent, Satan, just called the serpent in that area, between your seed and her seed. So we're going to see things about seed. He will crush your head. You shall bruise his heel. Most people, and myself very much included, think this is about Jesus. Covenants continue to Abraham. It talks about your seed being a blessing to all nations. And so we're going to see some connections to that with like the Greeks coming to see Jesus. I'll skip over this one for now. That was a promise made to all the Israelites, a covenant made with all the Israelites. And then one of the more near term, so I mean there's a lot of years between these, right? Was the promise that Nathaniel the prophet delivered to David that he had heard from the Lord, where the Lord said he'd establish a house for you. And this word house, think of it more as like it could mean temple, it could mean kingdom, it could mean family, it could mean dynasty. So like the word house can have a lot of meanings. So John's going to use this word house, and it's going to use the same Greek root word that they used in Samuel. And so chapter 12 is going to have a lot of prophecy fulfillment things. So it's going to take us some time to really go through it well. And so we watched those videos as just kind of a way to upload some of these things into our brain again. So you should go watch them before you keep watching me. So pause me and go do that. And so this Passover, the book starts with 6 days before Passover. And so it's another Passover. This is our third Passover in John. Just to remind some things about what Passover was. So the last Passover we saw was breaking the bread. The one before that, he was at the temple overturning the tables and the money changers, right? So it's one of 3 pilgrimage festivals. It's got the word Passover, which is really the first day of the festival. So it's a meal you have on the first day. But really it's a week-long festival called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You can read all about these things in the Old Testament. We won't take time to read this, but it specifies what day it should be on, the 15th day of the month of Abib. Abib got renamed Nisan after a while. So that's going to be the start of the week-long Festival of Unleavened Bread. The way this festival works, just to kind of like get your brain around these things a little bit, starts on the 15th of Nisan, goes until the 22nd of Nisan. So it's actually 8 days, technically. And they consider that the 15th is a special festival Sabbath. So they treat it like a Sabbath, as well as the last day. It's a festival Sabbath. But then there's also the weekly Sabbath, which who knows when it'll fall. Sometimes it will fall to where it happens to hit on the 15th and the 22nd. If it falls on the 15th, 22nd, that's actually kind of a special year, right? It happens about one year out of 9. And the 15th of Nisan, this is always kind of funny about how calendars, it actually can only be on a Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday. It's just kind of a weird little bullet point about that. By the way, this overlapped. Historians who study these things think that this would have happened in both 30 AD and 33 AD. And John's Gospel suggests, not clearly, but suggests that this is the year that Jesus died on the cross. More things that you can read about Passover events from the Old Testament, particularly about the lamb. So the original Passover, they slaughtered the lamb and the Lord passed over the houses that had blood on the doorpost. And so they made clear ordinances about how you're supposed to get the lamb on the 10th day, take care of him until the 14th day, slaughter him at twilight. And these dates are important because John is going to model these dates right on. So you take these passages and you try to put them on a calendar. 15th of Nisan would be here. This would be the start of unleavened bread. The day of preparation would be the 14th. 6 days before would be the 9th. So you would take your lamb on the 10th. You would kill it on the 14th, and you would prepare it. And then you would eat the Passover Seder on the 15th. Their days begin and end at sundown. So it's always kind of confusing for us because they would kill the lamb, and then a few hours later they would eat it at the meal. So once it was prepared, once the sun went down, then you would have the Seder. John aligns his gospel such that Jesus' death is the exact same time as when you slaughter Passover lambs. That was different from the other gospels. So we no longer need to look at this month calendar. We can just look at days. And so this kind of is a week. So from a week, 6 days before, to the day he's risen is kind of the week that we care about more than the week of unleavened bread. If you put a bunch of dates and times on here, I'm not going to go into this here. It shows when Jesus is killed, the day where he comes to Bethany, and then his triumphal entry. If you do the math, it actually happened on a Monday, not a Palm Sunday, but that's neither here nor there. It's the same day that you would take the lamb, and then it's the same day where you kill the lamb. So it's just kind of interesting how that works. People, by the way, love to do exact math on these things. And if this is true, what John said, that it was a Sabbath, 15th, 22nd special Sabbath, then that would have happened if the calendar was kept consistently on the 30th, AD 30 or AD 33. And so people can try to guess. Our best guess is April 3rd, 33 AD. Now, I don't actually put much stock in that, but I just kind of wanted to tell you what people do. So people that subscribe to this line of thinking, they usually think that Jesus died in either 30 or 33. Interestingly, very few people say 31 or 32 just because those don't calendar line up as well. To be perfectly honest, they used line of sight to determine when months started. So who knows if they were if they were on what we would guess, right? There's no way to know for sure. Also, the other reason not to put much stock in it is that it is different in the other Gospels. So the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all agree that Jesus ate the Passover. So they say that they prepared the Passover and he ate the Passover. So their timing is different, just to say it as clearly as we can. Some people harmonize them. I don't have a need to do that. And so we can talk about why there are differences in the gospel. It's actually going to be one of the major topics that we talk about today, but I just thought I'd mention some of those things before we got in. The point that I think John is making is that he is making a very clear week here. So at the start of the gospel, he talked about a day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then on the third day, this wedding in Cana. And that mirrors, right? And so on the third day, he'll be risen here. And so he talks about this week, and he uses the same words throughout these things, which is just really interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and do another thing that we've started to do. I've really liked this, where we teach you about tools. So the goal is not for you to listen to me lecture, because I'm boring, all right? I've listened to me lecture. The goal is for you to get better at these things. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video or just do it while you're watching and download this app called Olive Tree Bible app. Very popular app. They've got a version for Android. They've got a version for iPhone. They even have a version for Windows and Mac. So I can actually open up this thing on my Mac here, right? So I'm on my Mac and I can open it up here, which is kind of fun. I don't know how to get rid of that window, though. I'm not very good at it yet. And so I've got it on my Mac, and then I've also got it on my Windows computer. So last time we had you download Literal Word. We'll use that again here in a little bit. But then this time we also want you to open up this Olive Tree Bible app and go to the NIV version. That's important for what we're doing today. And also, I strongly recommend you, once you get it installed, click on the little gear here and turn on vertical scrolling. I find vertical scrolling much more natural than page scrolling. So you can go ahead and do those things. If you need to pause the video, you can, but you can do those at your leisure. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through a worksheet together to try to use this app. So I'll just go ahead and click on the link to the worksheet. Strangely enough, the worksheet's going to start with a review, and we're going to actually use the Literal Word app, which was last week's app, one more time before we dive into the Olive Tree Bible Study app. All right, so let's go to this worksheet, and let's see if we can figure out some things in here. All right, so here's the worksheet. I'll put a link below the video. But what we want to do here is we want to look at some details in this chapter, and then try to dive a little deeper, right? So I enjoy watching the YouTube videos of people making these things. I mean, I would recommend that you would. There's links in here to these. This is the next page, right? You can watch this thing with the Actors Speak version or the NIV version. Great to watch, but if you want to go a little deeper, you've got to kind of slow down and dive in. So take a minute and read verses 1 through 11. So you can read it inside this new app you've just downloaded. Once you've done that, you can pause me if you need. Let's take a look at verse 3. So verse 3 is a pretty simple verse. It just says, Mary took about a pint of pure nard, expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet, wiped it with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So pretty simple thing. The surface meaning is trivial to grasp. Poured oil, wiped off with hair. Place smelled like perfume. That makes sense. It's a very visual thing. My claim is that, so this is how kind of these things work. The words chosen by John, especially if you look at the actual Greek, are a very subtle way of saying that this event fulfilled the Davidic covenant. So the Davidic covenant, fancy word for the promise made to David. You can read it here again. We've already read it once. And so kings are anointed with oil. You can read 3 examples of that in the Old Testament. And if you look at the details, the specific words in this in this passage, I think you'll see that John was definitely providing that as like a secondary layer. Now this app is more for like normal people instead of Bible nerds. So we will have to go back to our literal word app. Literal word, usually I look at NASB 95 or LSB. Doesn't really matter which you do here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find verse 3 in here. And first off, it'll definitely look a little different in NASB or LSB. And try to look at some of these specific words. So in the NIV, it says the word poured. She poured it on Jesus' feet. And that's because NIV has a goal of trying to make these things easily understandable, right? The word, though, if you look at it in NASB or LSB, they actually use this word right here. So you can try to find it. She took the litra of perfume, very costly pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus. So the word poured is more accurately anointed, which is kind of interesting. And so I think that right there you're off to a very good start, that this is saying a little bit more than just about the oil. Let me find my screen here. The next word I'm going to have you look up is a little farther into the verse. The word filled. So see if you can take a minute, click on the word filled, and tell me more about that. Now for this one, what I'm suggesting you do is you look at the other usages. So if I look on the 87 other usages, you can see that this word filled doesn't just mean like the house smelled like that. It's almost always fulfilled. How the scriptures will be fulfilled. The prophets would be fulfilled. I mean, Matthew's going to love this word, right? And so even John talks about how the prophet might be fulfilled. The house was fulfilled with the fragrance of the perfume. How much different would it read if you actually put in the word fulfilled? It keeps going. The word fragrance, I'll just kind of do these faster now. Fragrance can mean like an aroma. For example, the effect of a sacrifice. And so you can kind of get in your brain like Genesis language, right? He smelled the soothing aroma. And Yahweh said to himself, I'll never again curse man for his interest of or evil from his youth. So it's so interesting that this word points immediately back to a covenant promise, right? So it's never again curse the ground because of man. So it's like a promise to Noah, which is crazy. So all these subtle like covenant things keep coming out just through word choices. And then perfume, you've probably seen this one coming, is really ointment, oil, right? And so if you were to read this sentence, the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So he was anointed, and then the house was fulfilled with the smell of the sacrifice of the oil. You can see that John is alluding to this house oil kingdom who would last forever. So it's just so crazy how subtle these things are. All right, that's my nerdy thing for today. Let's be a little less nerdy. Back into olive tree. So go back over to the olive tree app. This next one that we're going to do together, just to kind of learn more about it, we're going to stay in this passages that you've read already, this 1 through 11. And we're going to look at it in different Gospels. So this story that's in John 1 through 8 or 1 through 11 is based on an event, right? So I think that much is clear. And this event can be viewed by different people in different ways, and it can be incorporated into Gospels in different ways. And so John obviously has incorporated it to show how this is the crowning of the king. So the king of Israel is anointed and inaugurated as king here. Matthew and Mark do something similar, but Luke does something very different, right? So what I want you to do is take a minute. You can see the table here. And fill out, first off, where these things are found. This app makes it trivial, right? So this is not a trick question, but you just put this one right into there. You put Mark right into there. You put Luke right in that box. Then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go through and look at each one and see if you can figure out the answers to these questions. Where, when, who, things like that. So Matthew, I'll just kind of do one with you here. So it was in Bethany, so same as John. And it says that it's in the home of Simon the leper. Now in John, it doesn't mention whose house it was. I think they don't mention whose house it was because they were using house in a different way. But they never mention whose house it was. In fact, I think you kind of assume it's Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house, but it never actually says that. But here it does. It says it's in Simon the leper's house in Bethany. When was it? I give you a hint here. You actually have to go back up a little for that. It was 2 days before the Passover. So that's weird. So 2 days before, 6 days before. So there's a clear difference there. Anything about the woman, it just says a woman, right? So named Mary in John, but here it just says a woman. Lots of similarities, though, that make it pretty clear to me, at least, that this is the same story, right? You'll notice that instead of anointing his feet, it says that she poured this on my body there. And then over, it says head, right? Poured it on his head. And so it's just kind of interesting that, so it's head and feet. If you do Mark, you'll find that in this case, Matthew and Mark are identical. So the two rows are identical. So Bethany, Simon the leper, 2 days, head. So you get a freebie there out of that row. Then Luke is very different. The first thing you'll notice about Luke is the chapter number. So chapter 7, Luke's a long book, right? Is years earlier, which is crazy. In fact, this story, which could, I'll just acknowledge this, it could be a separate event. It could have happened more than once. A lot of people go that route, and I could not possibly argue either way. But I want to consider the possibility if it is the same event that triggered very different text. Why could that have been an answer? So the things you notice in this one. It says one of the Pharisees invited Jesus. And so this man, his name is Simon again. So Simon the leper, Simon the Pharisee this time. Could have been a lot of Simons. Could have been a different Simon. Simon was the most popular name of the first century, right? Amongst the Jewish culture. And so if you read this, so take a minute and read it. And I recommend you read all the way down to the end, like 50, right? So read the whole thing. And so you can pause me and do that. When did it happen? It happened years before. It happened in Galilee, right? The woman, it's interesting this time if you read it, this time doesn't say anything about it. This time says it's Mary. And here she's described as a sinful woman, right? In fact, the Pharisee says if he knew what kind of woman this was, he wouldn't even have anything to do with her because she's a sinner, right? And Jesus leverages this to tell a parable. And she anoints his feet, same as what John anointed, which is interesting. All right, so what's the point? So you fill out this table, you get that all happy. If you want to see my solutions to it, here's the solutions I put in. I even added a column for you. The point is that people use the same events to tell stories for the message they're trying to convey. And so it's so interesting that these things happen. There's no guide for what this event means. They just observe it. John even says that we didn't really fully understand it until after he died, right? So that's how confusing some of these things could be. Some observations that I would make from them. Mark is probably the best at just saying what happened. Just straight up, here's the eyewitness account, right? Mark was presumably John Mark, who was a young man whenever Jesus was crucified. He traveled with Peter, and the idea is that Peter and the other apostles and the other disciples that went after them, they would tell the story of the gospel all the time, right? They would preach it all the time. Mark was a translator for Peter. Peter presumably only spoke Aramaic, didn't speak Greek or Latin. Mark, on the other hand, spoke all three, right? So probably Hebrew, Aramaic, which are very, very similar, Greek and Latin. And Mark translated for Peter for years in Rome. And when Mark wrote his gospel, all he had to do was just write down the story that he'd been translating for years and years and years. I don't know if you've ever done anything for years and years and years. I've taught some classes for 19 years now, and I can do them in my sleep. So really, Mark just wrote down the thing that he and Peter had been doing for a long time. It has a lot of rich visual details, like a person telling a story who's trying to engage the audience. Examples here, she broke the jar. It's the one that says she broke the jar. It was made of pure nard. He mentions the alabaster jar. He mentions the exact amount, 300 denarii. It's also funny that in Mark, it often omits Peter-specific things, like when he walked in the water. So that's not a big point here. But if Peter does anything really good, Mark is less likely to mention it, which again shows the authorship of Peter there, which I think is so funny. Matthew, on the other hand, is your Old Testament connections guy. He removes story embellishments, so he wouldn't mention that the jar was broken unless it had significant like symbolic significance. Like he'll take it out. And that's how they wrote the Old Testament. Very sparse. Like if a detail's in there, it probably means something, right? And so Matthew's gospel is written with that mindset. Interestingly, this time there's really not that much breakdown of Old Testament. I think he probably just thought it was too obvious. He likes to do like the harder things, right? So I just think that that's interesting. Now let's talk about Luke's. So again, I mentioned this to start off. It is so different that it could be a different event. And I think that's actually the majority view of Christians, that it's a different event. And that's fine. I don't mind that at all. I do want to consider, just because I think it's healthy for us, what if it was the same event? How would you explain that? Like, how would you come to grips with that if that's what you believed? And so Luke, like all the gospel authors, he organized his material mostly chronologically, but mostly means that it was actually primarily theologically. So if he had a point that he really wanted to make, he would focus on making that point first and foremost. So the way that they wrote history is different than we write history. And so they would move a story. That could happen. They would compress a story. So like John compresses those like first 4 days where like a whole bunch of things happen into a 4-day event. And so long as they were making the truths of like the theological point they were making more clear, that's okay, right? That's good historical writing in that time period. We wouldn't do that today, but that's how they did it. So take a minute and go ahead and read the account in Luke if you haven't already. And read especially this verse 41 and then how it connects to 44 here. And some things will kind of like open your eyes, right? So pause it and do that if you haven't already. So what Luke has done here is he's combined this event with a parable. This parable, by the way, is also in Matthew. Matthew tells it in Matthew 18:22 through 30, completely unrelated to this event. And the moral of the story is the one who's been forgiven little loves little. The one who's been forgiven much loves much. So it kind of says that down here at the end. And so when you see what the parable is, and you see how Luke describes Simon and how Luke describes the woman, pieces start falling into place, right? So he describes Simon not as a leper, so he may have been a healed leper, but he describes him as a Pharisee. Both could be true, right? A Pharisee is a word that Matthew, Mark, and John, and probably us, consider like almost a dirty word, right? Like it's like, oh, you must be bad. But Pharisee really meant somebody who was religiously devout, like a strict adherence to the Torah, right? And so they would be someone who would be forgiven little. Like you couldn't think of a better example of somebody that needs to be forgiven little. And then this woman whose hair was down. By the way, having your hair down, they wouldn't do that. Everybody would have their hair up. So the fact that she wiped his feet with her hair meant her hair was down, which kind of means she's thought to be a woman of ill repute, right? So he describes her as a sinful woman, which makes his point very clear. So he has both a parable and an event which connect. And so they could be different events, but man, if it was the same event, I could explain how the details got changed, right? And it got moved to a different time period, which is okay if you're making a theological point. All right, moving on. Harped on that enough. John, of course, tells very personal stories. He knows the woman's name. He says that it's Mary. Could it have been somebody different? That's possibly right, because he made it fit here with Lazarus and Bethany and Mary so well. It's probably Mary. And so he is very personal. He says that the woman's name is Mary. He gives longer conversations. So in general, they go longer. This one is pretty short because he's kind of going pretty rapid fire here. He only mentions the feet. That actually fits very well. If you think about what's going to come in chapter 13, he's going to have a time where Jesus takes the role of a servant. He washes his disciples' feet, right? And so it fits very well with the foot washing theme that we're going to see in John. So it's just really kind of neat. Other things that this is where we ran out of time in the group, right? Other things that we've got in this worksheet that kind of go along. This one, I don't know if you can use the app to do this effectively, but see if you can make a stab at when these 6 events happen. So these events from the anointing that we see here in chapter 12, all the way up through, I put in as far as lifted up, which is a little far, are in different orders in the gospel. Let's use Luke as an example. So Luke has the anointed with oil years before. Luke has the start of like the Passion Week events with the triumphal entry. That kind of marks the start. And then Luke, like all the Gospels, have the money changers immediately after. And then he has, there's like a lot of other stuff too, so I just kind of left the blank here. The Last Supper is a Seder, Passover Seder, and then he's lifted up after Passover, some amount after. But see if you can take a stab, just make a guess, pause the video, make a guess where you think these things might happen. Cool, and we'll chat about it, and I'll use my cheat sheet here. So if we look at these things, so Luke was the one that was given. I put verse numbers behind his, so years earlier, 7, and then 19, 19, 22, 23, right? So you can kind of see that these things are chronologically closer. Matthew and Mark agree, so they, as part of the Synoptic Gospels, event 2, you can see all of them agree. Event 3, Luke was weird that he took this one earlier. Events 4 and 5, event 6. And you can see that they're almost sequential, right? So chapter 21, and I used this tool over here to figure these things out, right? So when does he come? He came in chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. Then number 3, the tables, was immediately next. The tables one is interesting because this is the one that John does early. So John puts the overturning of the tables 2 years prior, right? 2 or 3 years prior. And the question is, well, which one is right? or did it happen twice, right? I can't ever argue that it happened twice. It makes perfect sense that it could have happened twice. In John, he doesn't want this overturning of the tables to come up at all in the trial, right? In fact, this trial is very short anyway. But in Matthew and Mark, it comes up in the trial. So honestly, historically, it probably did happen here, right? But John puts it way up here. And again, the argument is theologically, that's where he thought it fit best. So he puts it right after the water into wine. It's a way of saying that he is the temple. And it's something that he put very early, which is just so interesting. And then after that, John switches the order of Passover and the Last Supper. And so his order is different. So there's actually going to be the Last Supper, and then he'll be lifted up. And then the Passover is he's in the ground for Passover, right? So the order is different on that. So I just thought I'd point that out just because I thought it was neat. All right, so next things that we would do. So we had ran out of time in the meeting by now. The next thing we were going to do, if we still magically had time, is to watch these things. So these are always interesting to watch the theatrical productions. But you can see what they thought it might have looked like to have Martha serving and them in a room, and what would happen when Mary pours oil on his feet. That version's fun. You can also watch this version, which is fun, but I recommend that you watch one of those two videos next. After that, go ahead and take a minute and read it and just try to think about some of these things that happen. Especially what I'd like for you to think about is connections to Old Testament covenants and promises. So this one where it talks about there were some Greeks among those who went up to the festival. So the worksheet will get into this some. Let's see here. I think it's this page right here. But it talks about the whole world for all nations. So the Greeks come up. And then they say things that are very close to chapter 1. Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew went and told Jesus. This guy went and told this guy. This guy went and told this guy. Tim Mackey talks about that too and does a really nice job going through that. Then the hour comes. Again, very connected to things that we've been learning about. Oops, sorry about that. So the hour comes. And so lots of connections to chapter 1. And then when he talks about the son, he talks about seeds, right? He talks about how a seed has to die and make many seeds. And seeds like that, that's what all these things are about, right? So his seed, his offspring. So Jesus is going to have many offspring. And he's got to die to produce these offspring, right? So it's just so interesting. And it says, yeah, he shall bruise his heel, but he's talking about how he's going to die, right? By the way, the Synoptic Gospels almost make it like a surprise when Jesus comes out of the tomb. John does not, right? Like John doesn't hide the fact, the fact that Jesus died. He doesn't hide it at all. And so it's very clear that that's where this train is going, right? To allow himself to be crushed so that he can achieve a victory, right? So interesting. After that, there's an interesting thing where he takes a quote that's normally in the Garden of Gethsemane. My soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. All the other synoptics put this in the Garden of Gethsemane. And so I'm curious what they say here. They just say it connects to verse 12. But this totally connects to other places. Let's see if I can bring it up here at all. No, I'm just going to so yep, here it is. So this is in the Garden of Gethsemane. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. If it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but as you will. And so John says that, Jesus says that here in John at this point, so a different time. A voice comes from heaven. This voice is not recorded in the other Gospels. I've glorified it and will glorify it again. There's only 3 voices from heaven in the Gospels. There's the one where he's baptized. This is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. There's one at the Transfiguration, same quote, I believe. And then there's this one in John, so not very common. Again, these Old Testament promises, obey my voice. And then there's another one about voice in here. I'm sure I can find it pretty quickly. But really in-depth, like deep stuff, right? It talks about how the Son of Man must be lifted up. That echoes back to chapter 3 of John, where we talk about hupsao and lifted up. The light. This chapter is deep, man. So the light which started in chapter 1 and is continued in chapter 3 and other chapters, walking in the light, definitely extends what we've heard about there. And then here's one of the more interesting ones, in my opinion. the camera steals the camera, which is the way that I choose to say it. He just stops the story and just says, hey, even though all this happened, people didn't believe. And that's probably surprising to you. In fact, you may not even believe that I'm telling you this story, but this is really what happened. And this was also to fulfill a prophecy. So he's on this prophecy bandwagon. And so he gives a quote from Isaiah 53, and then he gives a quote from Isaiah 6. Now, Tim Mackey, he loves Old Testament quotes, right? And so if you look at these two sections of Isaiah, and Tim will do a better job of this than me, they're talking in chapter 6 about how he has this throne room vision. He sees the feet of God, right? And then he talks about Yahweh. So I went ahead and put in Yahweh because I'm not offended by seeing the personal name of God being high and lifted up. And then in Isaiah 53, he talks about his servant, the suffering servant. And then in 52, just before 53, he talks about him being high and lifted up. So in one case, we've got Yahweh, high and lifted up. In Hebrew, it's Ramve Nasa. I forget how to pronounce it. Tim does it better, right? Ramve Nasa. And apparently those are the only two times. So we've got Yahweh, and then we've got the suffering servant. And the point is that John sees the connection between these two people, and he only really saw it after all these things happened, which is so interesting. But Isaiah said this because he saw his glory and spoke about him. By the way, NIV puts in his, which is fine because it is Jesus. But I almost like it better in more literal translations, just because it leaves it more ambiguous, right? Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke about him. And the point being is that the his and the him, it's both Yahweh and Jesus that Isaiah saw, right? And so the point is that these two characters are one, Yahweh and the suffering servant, which is just really fun. And then we'll just go ahead and kind of let things finish out. John gives back the camera, so that's just John talking straight into the camera. He gives back the camera to let Jesus say the final words of the chapter. And it's about he who looks at me sees not only me, but also the one who sent me. My words are the words of him who sent me, which will condemn them. I'm here to save, but my words are going to judge people. And I know that his commands lead to eternal life. Lots of deep things to finish things off. But that is going to be all of chapter 12. Honestly, I think you probably get the most out of just enjoying the cinematic production. So make sure you take time to watch those. And then you can also look into Tim Mackey talk about chapter 12. All right, we thank you for making it this far. Lots of good stuff in John chapter 12. We'll come back next time where we're going to start the final words to his disciples at the Last Supper. We'll see you then.